Hi friends, welcome back to the StoneburnerBooks YouTube channel. I'm excited to share this binding with you today. Whenever I share it over on my Instagram stories, people have questions about it and are really interested in it. I call it the chain stitch. It goes by a couple different names, but I'm excited to share it, so let's get started. All right, so before we get started on our actual tutorial, I want to show you the stitch up close so you can get a sense of what we'll be working on. This is just on a little notebook, but you can also do these through a cloth bound spine if you want to. I'm going to keep the materials very simple so that you are likely to have these around your house. You'll need 4 pieces of 8.5 by 11 just regular copier weight paper. You'll need 1 piece of heavier stock, card stock paper that's also 8.5 by 11. You'll need thread. I'm using waxed linen thread, but you could use just regular thread. For this binding in particular, you don't really need that waxed tackiness. And then also a needle. This can just be a regular sewing needle if that's what you have around the house. So the very first thing that we want to do is we are going to cut our text weight paper in half. So half of 11 is 5.5. So I'm going to measure and mark actually. So you'll want a straight ruler and we're going to mark this out. Just put a little hash mark here. And then when I get everything put together, I can line it all up and cut right at that mark. So I'm using a metal ruler with a blade to cut all my stuff, but you could use a paper cutter or you could even use scissors. Whatever you have that can get these pieces of paper cut in half. So now we have 8 pieces of paper here. And what you're going to want to do is just fold those in half. And this is going to be our inside part of our little notebook. Now you can definitely do this with higher quality materials, but for a basic tutorial, I want to get us started with just easy materials. Okay, so we're going to set those aside for now. We're also going to cut our cardstock down, again, at 5.5. And let's get everything lined up here. So we're only going to need one side of this for our cover. So we're going to go ahead and fold one side. But then the other side we want to keep because we're going to make a template. All right, so we're just going to nest our pages inside of our cover and we'll set those to the side. Now with this extra piece, I want you to cut lengthwise. I want you to cut 2 inches of that off because we're going to need that for our punching template. Okay. All right, so this we're going to turn into our punching template, and to do that we're just going to fold it lengthwise. And the reason I had you cut it lengthwise to start is because it needs to be taller than our book pages. Now you'll see I'm actually folding this against the grain, which is why it's not folding over very well, but I'm just going to use my Teflon folder here to smooth it out. Okay, so we are going to make our punching template for all the holes for this binding. I'm going to bring out my other mat so you can just see this a little bit better of how I'm marking it. So the first thing I want to do is line it up here on this side, and I want to mark 5.5 because I know that 5.5 is how tall my spine is going to be. So I won't need to put any holes taller than 5.5. So I'm just going to mark a big line right there. Okay, so I know I don't need to mark higher than that. Okay, so then every 1/2 inch, I'm just going to make a little mark because I like doing these holes about a 1/2 inch apart. Sometimes, depending on the binding, I'll go up to like 3/4 of an inch or maybe even an inch. But the farther away the holes get, you kind of lose some of the look of the design. Now that I've got those holes done, I'm just going to use my awl. This is something that you can find at a specialty art shop, but you can also find these at the hardware store. They're not very expensive. They're a pretty common tool, so that's nice and easy to do. I'm going to mark on those marks. I'm just going to punch a little hole in the fold right where all of those marks are. And then I'm going to take my eraser and erase all of those marks so that none of the pencil comes off onto my pages. I also like to go back from the inside and just make that hole a little bit bigger. It helps when you are actually punching your holes. You can see it a lot better. All right, so now we have our template, we have our pages and our cover, and we can go ahead and punch our holes. Get this out of the way. So what you want to do is, I like to just take this and kind of tap all the pages down so that this all lines up together. And then I just hold them. And I usually start a little bit into the middle to make my first hole. I think it's because that way it's easier to have a nice firm grip on your pages. You want to make sure that your hand is way out of the way when you're pushing through that awl. When in doubt, take it slow and double check that your fingers are nowhere near the awl, because it does not feel good to have an awl go through your finger, or even just gently press against your finger, because these things are pointy. Okay. All right, and then once those are all done, I do go back and do these ones that are closer to where my hand was holding it, but I, again, try to be really careful about that. So this last one, I'm gonna actually move my hand up. All right, so we have all of our holes punched in the edge there. Now, for measuring how much thread we need, we are going to measure 3 times the height of the book, because you're going to have thread doubled up on this side, and you're going to have a thread running on the inside as well. So I do 3 generous lengths, so I have a little bit on either side. 1, 2, 3. And you just can use a straight needle for this. No need to use a curved needle. These work just fine for this. And we'll start at the top. Now, I will say, going back to this finished one, if you look, this is the top. You're going to have a single stitch on one end, and then when you finish, it'll have the double stitches there. So I use this sometimes aesthetically. I'll sometimes start from the bottom and go up, depending on where I want that last little stitch to be, because I kind of, in my brain, it's kind of like a little arrow. So sometimes I like switch them up so that they're upside down or right side up. Quick interlude. This is actually an example of what I'm talking about. So you can see I have 4 different signatures sewn in on this bigger cover, and the 2 down here have the little single stitch there, and then the 2 on the outside have the single stitch up at the top. So it just kind of provides a little bit of movement, a little bit of interest into the binding. So, all right, back to the tutorial. All right, thanks for going on that journey with me. So we're gonna start by sewing at the top hole from the inside out. And I like to leave a little tail of a couple inches to hold on to. And then we're gonna go from down to the next hole and go from the outside in. Okay, and then we wanna tie our knot. So just a square knot, right over left, left over right. And this does get a little bit tricky because it's you know, it's kind of a wide space that you're tying it. I like to tie it so that the tail is headed in this direction, because that's where our next sewing, we're going to be going through that hole. So it's helpful and just helps everything lie down flat in the binding if you have your tail going that way. So with your knot tied, I cut off the little extra, and then we can sew in from the inside out of that next hole. And now what you're going to do is you're going to take your needle and put it underneath that stitch. Okay. And then once it's there, you just kind of want to gently tug it to make sure that there's no slack anywhere. And then you're going to go right back into that hole. Okay. And then again, it just continues on like that. You go in from the center, you loop around your stitches there. And then you go right back into that same hole that you came out of. Okay, so when you get to the last hole, you're going to sew it exactly as you've been doing for the others. So you just go in through that last hole, you loop it around and back through that bottom hole. And then to tie your knot, you just slip your needle underneath that stitch you just made and out through the hole. And I do this twice just to make sure that it's nice and tight. If you're not using waxed linen thread, you may want to do an additional knot or two. The waxed thread really does help in this situation to keep that knot tight. And I trim off the extra. And then we've got our finished binding. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I hope this was helpful for you, and I can't wait to see what you create with this binding. Bye.